My office, perched on the 32nd floor of Sterling and Finch, felt like a sanctuary. From my window, the city unfurled itself in a tapestry of muted grays and steely blues, a constant, predictable rhythm I had come to appreciate. My desk, usually a pristine expanse of polished mahogany, was currently a battlefield of legal briefs and meticulously organized binders for the Quantum Innovations versus Apex Solutions case. This wasn't just any case, it was the kind that made careers or, if mishandled, broke them. And I, Mia Hayes at a mere 25, was neck-deep in it. I thrived on precision. Every comma, every precedent, every footnote had its place and its purpose. My world was one of carefully constructed arguments, ironclad contracts, and the quiet satisfaction of a well-researched point. My colleagues often described me as composed, thorough, and, perhaps, a little too serious. I didn't mind. Seriousness, in my line of work, was an asset. It meant fewer mistakes, clearer thinking, and ultimately wins. Which was why the news from Mr. Harrison, our managing partner, had felt like a sudden tremor in my perfectly balanced professional ecosystem. Mia, he'd boomed through the phone, his voice a familiar rumble of authority. You'll be co-counseling with Lydia Thorne on quantum innovations. Her litigation expertise will complement your corporate background perfectly. Lydia Thorne. The name itself carried a certain weight in the firm's hallways, usually whispered with a mixture of awe and trepidation. She was our rising star in litigation, a whirlwind of aggressive tactics and razor-sharp instincts. Her reputation preceded her. Brilliant, fearless, and utterly uncompromising. Perfectly suited for the courtroom, perhaps, but my carefully ordered mind envisioned a clash of titans, or more accurately, a meticulous librarian being asked to conduct a symphony with a rock drummer. My first official meeting with Lydia confirmed my apprehensions, and then some. The conference room, typically hushed and respectful, seemed to hum with an unfamiliar energy the moment she walked in. She wasn't just walking, she was commanding the space. Her posture was straight, confident, almost challenging. Her suit, a dark charcoal, was impeccably tailored, emphasizing a frame that was both graceful and strong. Her dark hair, cut in a sleek, chin-length bob, framed a face that was all sharp angles and intelligent intensity. But it was her eyes that truly held me. They were a piercing shade of hazel, direct and unwavering, scanning the room with an almost predatory focus before settling on me. They seemed to assess, to weigh, to absorb everything in an instant. There was no casual glance from Lydia. Every look was an investigation. Mia Hayes, she said, her voice clear and surprisingly melodic, yet with an underlying edge of authority. She offered a brief, firm handshake that was over almost before it began. Glad to finally put a face to the legendary research skills. It wasn't quite a compliment, more of a direct acknowledgement of my utility, stated with a hint of something I couldn't quite place. Perhaps a challenge. We dove straight into the case. Mr. Harrison had given us the daunting task of defending quantum innovations against Apex Solutions, a rival tech giant claiming patent infringement. The stakes were astronomical, billions of dollars, and the very future of quantum's groundbreaking AI technology. This wasn't just about money. It was about innovation, reputation, and proving a point in the cutthroat world of technology. As I began to present my meticulously prepared overview, highlighting the contractual nuances and the long-term strategic implications, Lydia interjected, not rudely, but with an almost startling speed. And what about the immediate injunctive relief? Apex will push hard for a preliminary injunction. How are we countering that specifically? I paused, momentarily taken aback. My research indicates that if we can successfully argue for prior art, the injunction will be difficult to obtain. I've compiled a comprehensive list of prior art is a defensive play, she cut in, her gaze unwavering. We need an offensive strategy, something that puts them on the back foot before they even get their injunction hearing. What's the weakest link in their current patent claim? Is there a procedural error in their filing we can exploit? My internal alarm bells began to chime. My approach was to build an unassailable fortress of evidence. Lydia seemed to be to launch a preemptive strike before the enemy even reached the gates. I appreciated her aggression, in theory, but it felt reckless. My focus has been on establishing the validity of quantum's intellectual property through a detailed timeline of development and expert testimonies, I explained, trying to maintain my composed demeanor. A strong defense often negates the need for a risky offense. A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched the corner of Lydia's lips. It wasn't a smile, not exactly, but something close, a fleeting moment of amusement, perhaps, at my methodical stance. Sometimes, Mia, the best defense is a good offense. Especially in litigation. They expect us to be predictable. We won't be. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with the unspoken tension between our vastly different philosophies. I looked at the stacks of binders, the meticulously highlighted clauses, the carefully constructed timelines. She looked at the room, the invisible battleground, already planning her moves. This wasn't just a case. It was going to be an unexpected and potentially volatile partnership. And I had a feeling this feeling of being off balance, challenged, was only just beginning. The initial week of collaboration felt less like a partnership and more like a carefully choreographed duel. Each morning, I arrived at the office with a clear agenda, armed with my latest research and a structured plan for the day. Lydia, however, seemed to materialize with an almost chaotic brilliance, her mind already racing with new angles, unexpected questions, and often a disregard for the meticulous schedule I had laid out. Our shared office space, usually a quiet sanctuary where I could delve into the intricate details of corporate law, became a charged arena. I'd be poring over a patent application, tracing the lineage of a specific technological component, when Lydia would burst in, usually with a phone still pressed to her ear, concluding a forceful conversation with an expert witness. She'd then slam a thick file onto her desk, not gently, like I would, but with a decisive thump, before turning to me. Mia, about the Decker precedent, she'd begin, her hazel eyes alight with a new thought. I'm thinking we can frame it not as a direct comparison, but as a pattern of industry practice, which then strengthens our fair use argument. What's your take on that specific phrase in paragraph 3, section B? My internal processor would whir. The Decker ruling primarily focused on reverse engineering in a non-competitive market, I'd reply, pushing my glasses further up my nose. While the industry practice angle is interesting, the court's narrow interpretation there makes it a weak foundation for our fair use claim. We risk diluting our stronger arguments. A shadow of impatience would cross her face. But if we spin it with the right expert testimony, focusing on the intent behind the reverse engineering, we can create ambiguity. The jury needs to see doubt, Mia, not just facts. Your facts are solid, don't get me wrong, but they're not always enough to move a room. She'd punctuate her point with a sharp gesture of her hand. Our disagreements weren't personal, not in the venomous sense, but they were deeply rooted in our professional identities. I believed in the unassailable truth of evidence. She believed in the power of persuasion and strategic ambiguity. It felt like trying to build a house with two architects. One insisted on a solid, traditional foundation, the other sketching daring, cantilevered designs without a thought for load-bearing walls. One particularly tense afternoon, we were reviewing potential jury selections. I had meticulously researched each candidate, compiling psychological profiles based on their online presence and previous jury service. This candidate, Mrs. Jenkins, I pointed to a profile, has a background in software development and a history of supporting intellectual property rights. She would be an ideal juror for our side, given her inherent understanding of the technology. Lydia leaned forward, scanning the same profile, but her focus was elsewhere. Look at her social media. She's heavily involved in a community gardening project. Very group-oriented, very fair share. She might be swayed by Apex's big corporation versus the little guy narrative, even if it's baseless. We need someone more individualistic, less susceptible to emotional appeals. Emotional appeals are precisely what we need to guard against with a strong, factual presentation. I countered, my voice tight. Her professional background offers an invaluable perspective that outweighs any potential community spirit bias. Lydia just shook her head, a short, dismissive motion. You're seeing the resume, Mia. I'm seeing the person. Jurors aren't algorithms. They're people with feelings and preconceptions. And her community spirit could mean she's sympathetic to what Apex will spin as an underdog story. We need to cut her. The argument escalated, a slow burn that threatened to ignite the entire room. We were at an impasse, both convinced our approach was superior. The air crackled between us, thick with unspoken frustrations. The clock ticked, a loud, insistent rhythm against our clashing wills. The managing partner, Mr. Harrison, observed our strained dynamic with a growing frown during our daily briefings. He'd offer vague warnings about cohesion and unity, but his words seemed to bounce off the invisible wall that had sprung up between Lydia and me. We were two formidable forces, undeniable in our individual strengths, but utterly incapable of finding a harmonious frequency. The tension reached a peak just before a critical preliminary hearing. We were preparing a key witness, Dr. Aris, a renowned AI ethics expert. My plan was for Dr. Aris to provide a clear, academic explanation of quantum's algorithm, focusing on its unique, independently developed architecture. Lydia, however, wanted to push Dr. Aris to speculate on Apex's intent to steal, to paint them as malicious actors, a strategy one felt was not only speculative, but also beyond the scope of Dr. Aris's expertise. We need to stick to the facts, Lydia, I insisted, my voice low but firm, as we stood in a small conference room after Dr. Aris had left, clearly flustered by Lydia's aggressive line of questioning during practice. Pushing him into conjecture will only make him appear less credible on the stand. We risk his entire testimony. Credibility isn't just about facts, Mia. It's about conviction. It's about making the jury feel something. She shot back, her hands on her hips, her posture radiating defiance. If we just lay out dry facts, Apex will paint us as the boring, complex corporation, and they'll get away with theft. We need to create a narrative. A narrative based on speculation is a house of cards, I said, my patience wearing thin. This is a court of law, not a theater. We could lose everything if we stray from the evidence. The argument raged, sharp words exchanged, neither of us willing to yield. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the next morning. Our inability to agree on how to present Dr. Aris's testimony, on the very tone and emphasis, led to a last-minute, disjointed strategy. I tried to focus him on the technical details. Lydia tried to prod him into emotional accusations. Dr. Aris, caught between our conflicting directives, faltered on the stand, his testimony appearing hesitant and, to my dismay, slightly inconsistent under Apex's cross-examination. That evening, as I stared at my reflection in the dark office window, the city lights a blur of cold indifference, the weight of our potential failure pressed down on me. Our inability to coordinate, to truly collaborate, had created a crack in our armor. The managing partner's concerned phone call that evening, his tone grave, confirmed my worst fears. Our individual brilliance was being undone by our collective disharmony. This case, the one that could define our careers, was teetering on the edge, all because we couldn't get out of our own way. The preliminary hearing was, in my estimation, a quiet disaster. Not a catastrophic explosion, but a slow, insidious leak that threatened to sink the entire vessel. Dr. Aris's testimony, a crucial pillar of our defense, had been rendered less impactful than it should have been. His hesitation, born from our conflicting instructions, had been subtle, but enough for Apex's sharp legal team to exploit. They painted him as uncertain, his expertise questioned, and our foundational arguments slightly undermined. Mr. Harrison's voice on the phone the following morning was clipped, devoid of its usual booming warmth. Mia, he began, without preamble. Dr. Aris's performance yesterday was less than stellar. The judge's initial reaction was not favorable to our arguments for maintaining the injunction. We've been granted a temporary stay, but barely. This setback is significant. His pause hung heavy in the air. I understand there are creative differences between you and Miss Thorne. But this firm cannot afford to lose this case due to a lack of cohesion. Find a way to work together, or I will be forced to make difficult decisions regarding the team." The line clicked dead, leaving me in a chilling silence. The implication was clear. My meticulous preparation, Lydia's aggressive tactics, all of it was irrelevant if we couldn't function as a single, effective unit. The weight of potential failure settled heavily on my shoulders, a physical ache that tightened my chest. I had never encountered such professional disarray, and the idea of my methodical approach being deemed insufficient, or worse, detrimental, was a bitter pill to swallow. I prided myself on control, on foresight, on preventing these exact scenarios. Yet here we were. I knew Lydia was brilliant. I couldn't deny her sharp intellect, her ability to dissect an argument in seconds, her unwavering commitment to our client. But her impulsiveness, her dramatic flair, felt like a constant threat to the careful architecture I tried to build. My frustration with her unwillingness to adhere to a more structured plan gnawed at me. How could someone so intelligent be so seemingly disorganized in her execution? The remainder of the day was a blur of frantic damage control. I buried myself in research, trying to anticipate Apex's next move, to find any legal maneuver that could counteract the impression left by Dr. Eris. Every line of text on the screen, every case precedent I unearthed, felt less like a solution and more like a desperate attempt to patch a growing hole. The immense pressure of the case, the looming disappointment for our client, for the firm, for myself, was suffocating. Lydia was equally immersed in her own frantic efforts. I could hear her animated conversations through our shared office wall, the sharp tap of her fingers on the keyboard, the occasional frustrated sigh. She was fighting, too, in her own way. But the invisible wall between us felt higher than ever, a tangible barrier woven from our clash of wills and the bitter taste of a shared, undeniable setback. The hours bled into evening. The firm slowly emptied, the hushed hum of activity giving way to a profound quiet broken only by the distant city sounds. I was alone, or so I thought, in our shared office, still wrestling with the case files, the blue light of my monitor reflecting in my glasses. The quiet intensified my anxiety, magnifying every doubt, every what if. Then, a subtle sound broke through my concentration, the low, almost imperceptible murmur of a frustrated exhale. I looked up. Lydia was still there, hunched over her desk, her back to me. Her usually erect posture was slumped, a rare sight. She ran a hand through her short hair, a gesture that seemed less confident and more weary. Her shoulders, usually so squared and defiant, seemed to carry a visible weight. I watched her for a moment, a silent observer in the dim light of the office. She picked up a legal pad, scribbled something furiously, then crumpled it with a swift, decisive motion, tossing it into the wastebasket. It was an uncharacteristic display of raw emotion, a small crack in the formidable facade she usually presented. In that fleeting moment, I saw not the aggressive litigator, the whirlwind of energy and unyielding certainty, but a human being grappling with the immense pressure we were both under. There was a vulnerability in that tired sigh, a hint of worry in the way she stared at the case files spread before her, as if they held an answer she couldn't quite grasp. It was a stark reminder that beneath the professional armor, we were both just trying to navigate a complex, high-stakes battle, and we were both feeling the strain. It was a fleeting glimpse, a quiet unveiling of the person beneath the formidable lawyer, and it disarmed me more than any verbal argument ever could have. The immediate anger, the frustration I had harbored, momentarily receded, replaced by a quiet, unsettling sense of shared burden. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city and the occasional rustle of papers as Lydia shifted. I remained still, watching her, a strange mix of professional concern and an unexpected, almost gentle curiosity stirring within me. The crumpled paper in the wastebasket, the slump of her shoulders, they were details that chipped away at the perfectly composed image I had of Lydia Thorne. After another long moment, she sighed again, a deeper, more profound sound this time, and slowly pushed away from her desk. She stretched, her movements fluid but clearly tired, then walked over to the small kitchenette area in our shared office. I heard the clink of ceramic as she poured herself a glass of water. I took a deep breath, the decision to speak forming almost instinctively. It wasn't my usual style to break such a strained silence, especially not with Lydia, but the raw humanity I had just witnessed compelled me. "Rough day," I said, my voice softer than I intended, almost a whisper in the vast, empty firm. Lydia paused, her back still to me, then slowly turned. Her eyes, usually so sharp and direct, seemed a little softer in the dim light, shadowed by fatigue. She looked at me, not with her usual challenging intensity, but with a guarded curiosity. "Understatement of the year, haze," she replied, her voice a little rough, devoid of its usual bite. She took a slow sip of water. I pushed my chair back, the soft squeak echoing in the quiet. Mr. Harrison wasn't pleased. Not with Dr. Eris's testimony. Not with our coordination. I chose my words carefully, avoiding direct blame, focusing on the shared problem. Lydia's jaw tightened. She walked back to her desk, not sitting down but leaning against the edge, facing me. Her arms were crossed, a familiar defensive posture, but her gaze was less confrontational. "He has a right not to be pleased. We almost sabotaged ourselves." Her admission was stark, unvarnished. It was the first time she'd acknowledged our collective failure so plainly. "The stakes are incredibly high," I continued, finding a rhythm. "For Quantum, for the firm, for us." I gestured vaguely between us. My entire career trajectory could be impacted by this. "I imagine yours too." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Impacted? Try nuked. I've put everything into this firm. Sacrificed a lot to get here." Her eyes drifted towards the window, looking out at the glittering cityscape. There was a flicker of something in them, a deep-seated determination, yes, but also a hint of a long, arduous journey. "Not just for the prestige, you know. There are reasons I push so hard. Things I need to prove. To myself, mostly." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. It was a rare, almost fragile glimpse into her inner world, a chink in the formidable armor. I nodded slowly. "I understand that drive. I've always been driven by the desire for order, for perfection in my work. To build something undeniable, brick by careful brick." She turned her gaze back to me, and for the first time, it felt like she was truly seeing me, not just my professional persona. And I'm about tearing down what's faulty, finding the cracks, exposing the weaknesses. It's why I do what I do. Different sides of the same coin, I guess. She paused, her voice softening slightly. "But coins are useless if they're split down the middle." The metaphor hung in the air, apt and poignant. It was a tacit acknowledgement of our disunity, spoken in a way that bridged the gap between our opposing styles. "So," I said, pushing the thought further, "how do we unsplit it?" Lydia's gaze sharpened, but this time, it was with a collaborative intent. "We start by actually listening to each other. Not just waiting for our turn to speak, not just looking for the flaws in the other's argument." She pushed off her desk, walking a few steps toward the large conference table, her hands gesturing slightly. "Your research is phenomenal, Mia. Truly. It's the backbone. But sometimes, a backbone needs a sharp edge to defend itself. And my sharp edge needs that backbone. Otherwise, it's just flailing in the air." It was a concession, a form of reaching out from Lydia Thorne. And it resonated with me. And sometimes, I offered, a small smile playing on my lips. That sharp edge needs to consider the integrity of the whole structure before it starts chipping away. She met my gaze, and this time, the hint of a genuine smile touched her lips, a quick, fleeting light in her eyes. "Truce?" she asked, extending her hand across the space between us. I took it, her grip firm and surprisingly warm. "Truce," I confirmed, the word feeling less like a negotiation and more like a quiet, profound understanding. The air in the room, which had been so thick with tension and frustration, suddenly seemed to lighten. An unspoken agreement had formed, a tentative bridge built across the chasm of our professional differences. We stood there for a brief, silent moment, the city lights gleaming outside the window, two solitary figures in a vast, empty office, united by the weight of a monumental task and the fragile, burgeoning hope that we might actually be able to do it together. The initial seeds of trust, sown amidst the quiet hum of the building, felt less like an obligation and more like a genuine possibility. The morning after our unspoken truce, the atmosphere in our shared office was subtly altered. The tension hadn't vanished entirely, but it had morphed into a watchful respect, a cautious opening. We still approached the case from our distinct angles, but now there was a conscious effort to integrate, rather than oppose. My meticulous research, once a source of quiet satisfaction, became a foundational map for Lydia's strategic maneuvers. She would sit across from me, her brow furrowed in concentration, as I walked her through complex patent diagrams and dense legal histories. She didn't interrupt with immediate counterarguments, but rather with questions that delved deeper, seeking the vulnerabilities I might have overlooked, the tactical opportunities hidden within the minutiae. So, if we present the 2018 precedent on implied license with your data on their prior collaborations, she'd muse, tapping a pen against her chin, we can effectively argue that Apex had tacitly approved Quantum's development, nullifying their current infringement claim. It's aggressive, but your documentation makes it ironclad. Her eyes would meet mine, a flash of approval, of shared intellectual thrill. In turn, I found myself appreciating the precision in her aggression. Lydia's ability to anticipate the opposing counsel's moves was uncanny. She could deconstruct their potential arguments before they even uttered them, preparing a counter-narrative that was both sharp and deeply rooted in the legal principles I had laid out. During our practice sessions for witness examinations, she'd push, prod, and sometimes even playfully bait, drawing out details that a calmer approach might have missed. I, in turn, would listen, my mind racing to connect her spontaneous questions to the broader legal framework, ensuring her boldness stayed within bounds. We started to develop a rhythm, a synergy that surprised even us. My calm, analytical questions during strategy sessions were now met with thoughtful consideration from Lydia, rather than immediate dismissal. Her quick, decisive pronouncements were tempered by a new willingness to hear my concerns, to integrate the detailed nuances I uncovered. It was like two instruments, initially playing discordant notes, slowly learning to harmonize, each adding its own distinct voice to a growing, complex melody. The case progressed successfully, moving through various motions and depositions with a newfound, almost effortless momentum. There were still moments of friction, of course, old habits dying hard. But now, they were quickly resolved, often with a wry look or a shared, knowing sigh, followed by a compromise that strengthened our overall strategy. As we navigated the intricate web of legal arguments, I found myself noticing Lydia outside of the immediate professional dynamic. It began subtly, involuntarily. I'd catch the way her brow would furrow in concentration when she was truly absorbed in a document, creating faint lines that spoke of deep thought. Or the expressive gestures of her hands when she explained a complex point, her fingers almost dancing in the air, conveying as much as her words. Sometimes, during a break in a long meeting, she'd lean back in her chair, a brief, genuine smile gracing her lips after a particularly clever point she'd made, or a difficult legal hurdle we'd overcome. In those moments, the sharp intensity in her eyes would soften, revealing a warmth that was both unexpected and profoundly captivating. Her dark hair would fall across her forehead, and for a fleeting second, she would appear less like the formidable litigator and more like a woman completely at ease, entirely in her element. There was a vibrancy about her, a raw, undeniable energy that hummed just beneath the surface, captivating my attention more and more each day. I found myself increasingly drawn to her quick wit, her passionate advocacy, the way she seemed to light up when she was explaining a legal concept she truly believed in. There was a surprising precision in her arguments, a deep commitment that went beyond mere professional ambition. I started to see past the aggressive facade to the sharp, incisive mind beneath, the unyielding spirit that fueled her every action. It was a quiet appreciation at first, a purely intellectual admiration, but it was growing, subtly, into something more. We'd linger over coffee in the mornings, our professional discussions bleeding into more personal territory. Not deeply personal, not yet, but enough to offer glimpses. We'd talk about the books we were reading, the art exhibits we'd seen, the surprising absurdity of a local news story. There were shared laughs over inside jokes that only we, with our unique and sometimes frustrating partnership, would understand. A comfortable silence would often settle between us during long hours, a testament to the fact that we no longer needed to fill every space with words or arguments. The invisible line between colleague and friend, once so clearly delineated, was blurring slowly, irrevocably, transforming into something altogether new. And with each passing day, I felt a quiet, unsettling warmth whenever Lydia was near, a growing awareness of her presence that went far beyond mere professional camaraderie. The trial itself was a whirlwind, a relentless march through expert testimonies, cross-examinations, and legal skirmishes. But within that storm, Lydia and I moved with an almost preternatural synchronization. Her sharp questions would follow my detailed presentations of evidence, creating a seamless narrative for the jury. My carefully documented facts would provide the impenetrable shield for her bold, often emotionally resonant arguments. We were no longer two architects with conflicting visions. We were master builders, each contributing essential elements to a structure that was both robust and compelling. During a particularly intense moment, as Apex's counsel tried to undermine one of our key technical witnesses, Lydia leaned over and whispered a precise phrase for me to pass to our witness, a counterpoint so incisive it instantly neutralized the attack. I relayed it without hesitation, an unspoken trust passing between us. In turn, when she was in the thick of a heated cross-examination, her eyes would briefly flick to mine, a silent query for a specific document reference or a subtle factual correction, and I would have it ready, sliding the right binder open, anticipating her need. We anticipated each other's moves, our collaboration becoming a fluid, intuitive dance. This newfound harmony wasn't confined to the courtroom. The long hours, the late nights poring over documents, the shared meals consumed at our desks, all these moments chipped away at the professional distance that had initially defined our relationship. Our conversations, once strictly confined to legal strategy, started to drift. Over lukewarm coffee, we'd find ourselves discussing more than just case precedents. We talked about our lives outside the firm, glimpses of our individual worlds emerging like quiet constellations. Lydia, I discovered, had an unexpected passion for independent cinema and a surprisingly soft spot for old jazz records. She spoke about her childhood, growing up in a bustling, close-knit neighborhood, a stark contrast to my own more solitary upbringing. She hinted at an intense drive, a need to prove herself against perceived odds, but she never dwelled on specifics. It was enough, for now, to see the genuine passion that simmered beneath her aggressive exterior. And I, who rarely shared much beyond professional pleasantries, found myself opening up, discussing my love for hiking in national parks, my quiet pursuit of photography, the comfort I found in routine. She listened, not with the impatient energy I had once observed, but with a genuine interest, her gaze steady, absorbing. She asked insightful questions, not about facts, but about feelings, about motivations, making me articulate emotions I usually kept carefully guarded. It was during one of these late-night sessions, the city lights twinkling outside our office window like scattered diamonds, that the shift became undeniable within me. We were reviewing a critical piece of evidence for the next day, the tension of the impending trial still thick in the air. Lydia was explaining a particularly intricate legal maneuver, her hands gesturing animatedly, her eyes alight with the pure joy of intellectual combat. I watched her, truly watched her, not just as my brilliant colleague, but as Lydia. The way her dark hair framed her face when she tilted her head in thought, the elegant curve of her neck as she leaned forward, the spark in her hazel eyes when she was truly passionate about an idea. There was a strength, a vibrant life force in her, that both challenged and fascinated me. A warmth, unsettling and entirely new, began to bloom in my chest whenever she was near. It wasn't the warmth of camaraderie, nor the intellectual satisfaction of a successful collaboration. This was a different kind of pull, a quiet yearning that defied logic and professional boundaries. My thoughts about her started to extend beyond work, wondering what she was doing on a weekend, finding myself replaying moments of shared laughter, noticing the subtle scent of her perfume after she left a room. The internal turmoil was significant. I was Mia Hayes, the composed, methodical lawyer. My life was ordered, predictable. This feeling, this magnetic pull towards Lydia, was anything but. It was a chaotic, beautiful anomaly, threatening to unravel the carefully constructed emotional walls I had built around myself. The fear of jeopardizing the incredible professional synergy we had found, the fragile, yet strong, friendship that had grown between us, was immense. Yet, the longing was equally potent, a silent, persistent hum beneath my composure. One evening, after the day's proceedings, we stopped at a quiet bistro near the courthouse for a quick bite before heading back to the office. The conversation drifted, as it often did now, to everything and nothing. Lydia was recounting a funny anecdote about a particularly stubborn opposing counsel from an old case, her laughter bright and infectious. I found myself smiling, truly smiling, a genuine openness that felt rare and precious. As her gaze met mine across the small table, there was a quiet understanding in her eyes, a shared history of triumphs and near failures, of professional clashes and an unexpected, deep connection. In that fleeting moment, the air thickened, charged with an unspoken current, a profound sense that we had crossed a threshold, entering a space where the boundaries of colleague and friend had dissolved into something far more profound, far more personal. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. The trial reached its crescendo with the closing arguments. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. This was it, the culmination of months of relentless work, the final act in a drama where the stakes were immeasurable. As I watched Lydia rise to deliver her part of the closing, a surge of pride, tinged with that now familiar, unsettling warmth, washed over me. She commanded the room, her voice clear and resonant, weaving together the intricate threads of evidence I had so painstakingly prepared. She spoke not just with conviction, but with a profound understanding of the human element, of the injustice Apex sought to inflict. She used my meticulously arranged data, my timelines and expert testimonies as the unshakable foundation for her passionate appeals. Every gesture, every nuanced emphasis, was perfectly placed, designed to resonate deep within the jury's collective conscience. I felt a surge of admiration, not just for her legal prowess, but for the sheer force of her spirit, the way she channeled her entire being into advocating for our client. When it was my turn, I stepped forward, my voice calmer, more measured, but imbued with a quiet authority that only months of deep understanding could bring. I solidified the legal framework, addressing every technical point, every legal precedent, leaving no room for doubt about the validity of quantum's intellectual property. Our arguments, once disparate and clashing, were now a perfectly orchestrated symphony, Lydia's fiery crescendos followed by my steady, logical resolutions. We had built an unassailable case, brick by careful brick, and then given it a voice that soared. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity, though in reality, it was only a few agonizing days. Each minute was a test of patience, a silent battle against the gnawing anxiety of uncertainty. Lydia, usually a whirlwind of restless energy, seemed to find a strange quietness during this period, though I could see the tension in the set of her jaw, the way her fingers drummed a silent rhythm on her desk. We barely spoke during those days, existing in a shared, strained silence, each lost in our own thoughts and fears, connected by the invisible thread of the waiting verdict. Then the summons came. The courtroom buzzed with renewed energy, a palpable anticipation hanging in the air. As the jury foreman read the verdict, "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Quantum Innovations," A collective gasp of relief swept through our side of the courtroom. My breath caught in my throat. We had won. A wave of profound relief, exhilarating and almost dizzying, washed over me. It was more than just a professional victory. It was a testament to our perseverance, to the unlikely partnership that had not only survived but thrived. I looked across at Lydia, who was standing beside me at the council table. Her face, usually so composed, was momentarily softened by an unadulterated joy. Her eyes, usually so sharp, were bright, a triumphant light shining in them. Our gazes met across the small space, and in that fleeting moment, the roar of the courtroom faded into an indistinct hum. There was a shared glance, a silent acknowledgement that transcended words. It was a recognition of every late night, every heated debate, every breakthrough, every shared burden. It was a silent acknowledgement of our journey, of the improbable path we had walked together to reach this pinnacle. But beneath the triumph, an even deeper current stirred within me. The victory intensified the unspoken connection between us, amplifying the warmth that had been growing in my chest for weeks. In Lydia's radiant smile, in the way her eyes held mine, I saw more than just a brilliant colleague. I saw a woman whose energy, whose passion, whose very presence had profoundly altered my landscape. A powerful, almost magnetic pull tugged at me, a longing that was no longer just a quiet hum but a vibrant thrumming in my veins. The implications of these emotions, the fear of jeopardizing everything we had built, both professionally and personally, still loomed. It was a precarious precipice, this realization, where the line between profound professional respect and something far more intimate blurred entirely. The silence of the courtroom, after the initial outburst, was suddenly charged with this unspoken current, a profound sense that the true victory, for me, extended far beyond the legal outcome. It lay in the burgeoning, undeniable feelings that had taken root, threatening to bloom into something I hadn't dared to name. The firm erupted in celebration. Managing partners shook our hands, champagne corks popped in the hallways, and the air thrummed with the joyous relief of a hard-won victory. Amidst the cheerful chaos, Lydia and I were constantly pulled in different directions, congratulated, clapped on the back, our names repeated like a mantra of success. Yet, through it all, my gaze kept finding hers across the crowded rooms, a silent tether between us. Each time, she would offer a quick, genuine smile, a shared understanding passing between us that this triumph was uniquely ours. Later that evening, after the main firm celebration had begun to wind down, Lydia found me near the deserted coat check. "Still up for a quieter celebration, Hayes?" she asked, her voice a little husky from all the talking, but her eyes still sparkling with exhilaration. "I know a place, low-key, excellent whiskey." My heart gave a quiet lurch. "Lead the way, Thorne," I replied, a lightness in my voice I hadn't realized I possessed. The idea of extending the evening with her, away from the firm's prying eyes, felt like a precious gift. She led us to a small, unassuming bar tucked away on a quiet side street. The lighting was dim, the music a soft, unobtrusive jazz, creating an atmosphere that felt both intimate and comforting. We settled into a corner booth, the worn leather of the seats a welcome contrast to the polished formality of our days. The tension of the trial, the burden of the wait for the verdict, began to dissipate with each passing minute. We ordered drinks, a neat whiskey for Lydia, a classic gin and tonic for me, and started to recount the dramatic moments of the trial, laughing at our early clashes, marveling at how we had found our rhythm. The alcohol, though not consumed in excess, began to lower our inhibitions, softening the edges of our professional personas. "Remember that moment during Dr. Eris's cross-examination?" Lydia chuckled, leaning back against the booth, a strand of dark hair falling across her forehead. "When Apex tried to imply he was biased. Your subtle glance gave me the exact document number I needed to shut them down. And your perfectly timed objection during their closing argument," I countered, feeling a genuine smile spread across my face. "It was brilliant. Pure instinct, but backed by solid logic." We spoke for what felt like hours, our voices growing softer, our laughter more relaxed. We shared personal anxieties from the trial, the moments of doubt, the quiet triumphs only we could truly understand. The conversation flowed easily, effortlessly, touching on everything from the nuances of legal ethics to the absurdities of daily life. I found myself drawn deeper into her world, appreciating the complexity beneath her fierce exterior, the thoughtful mind that often went unnoticed in her aggressive pursuit of justice. Her eyes, in the low light, seemed to hold a profound depth, reflecting the triumph and the sheer exhaustion of the preceding months. There was a vulnerability in her laughter, a genuine openness that I had only glimpsed before. The air between us was charged, not with professional tension, but with something new, something indefinable, yet intensely palpable. It was a potent cocktail of relief, shared victory, and an undeniable attraction that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. In a lull in the conversation, as we sat facing each other, the weight of the unspoken hanging heavy, I felt a sudden urge to bridge the gap between us. Without overthinking, I leaned forward slightly and gently pressed my lips to hers in a brief, soft kiss. It was a quiet expression of the connection we'd built, of the feelings that had grown too strong to ignore. Lydia's eyes widened, a flash of surprise crossing her face. Her body stilled for a moment, then she gently pulled back, her expression a mix of uncertainty and something I couldn't quite read. She quickly pushed back from the table. I should go, she said, her voice strained, a raw edge to it. She stood, not meeting my gaze, and quickly excused herself, leaving me alone in the booth, grappling with a sudden, deafening silence and the weight of my impulsive act. The jazz music, once comforting, now felt like a mournful dirge. The days following the kiss were a desolate landscape of tension and avoidance. Lydia maintained a professional distance that was colder, more formal than our earliest, most contentious interactions. Her usual directness was replaced by a guarded reserve, her hazel eyes carefully avoiding mine during team meetings. The easy camaraderie that had blossomed between us withered, replaced by a palpable awkwardness that permeated our shared office space. The silence, once comfortable, was now a heavy, oppressive shroud. I was consumed by a potent cocktail of regret, anxiety, and a fierce, unyielding resolve. Regret for the impulsiveness of my action, anxiety over the potential ruin of our professional relationship and the fragile friendship we had cultivated. But beneath it all was the resolve that I could not let this silence, this avoidance, persist. The feelings I had for Lydia were too profound, too real, to be left unspoken, or worse, misinterpreted as a drunken mistake. I knew I needed to speak to her, not in the charged atmosphere of the office, but somewhere neutral, somewhere quiet. I sent her a brief, to-the-point message. Lydia, we need to talk. Not about the case. Just us. Please. It took her a full day to respond, a simple, curt fine. Coffee shop on 5th at 7 p.m. The brevity of her reply offered little comfort, but at least it was a response. The coffee shop was bustling, a stark contrast to the quiet intimacy of the bar. I arrived early, my hands clammy, a knot of nerves tightening in my stomach. When Lydia walked in, she looked as formidable as ever in a sharp blazer, her hair perfectly styled. But her eyes, as they scanned the room and finally landed on me, held a flicker of apprehension I hadn't seen before. She chose a small table in the corner, away from the main flow, and sat opposite me, her posture rigid. Lydia, I began, my voice a little unsteady, but determined to be honest. About the other night, I need to explain. She held up a hand, a quiet gesture that nonetheless conveyed a boundary. Mia, it's fine. We had a lot to drink. It was a stressful week. Let's just pretend it didn't happen. It was a mistake. Her words were clipped, almost rehearsed, designed to shut down the conversation before it even began. No, I insisted, shaking my head. It wasn't a mistake. Not for me. What happened that night, it was an expression of something I've been feeling for weeks, something that's grown undeniably real since we started working together. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to meet her guarded gaze. Lydia, you've profoundly impacted me. More than any colleague, more than any friend I've ever had. Your energy, your wit, your passion, it drew me in. It challenged me in ways I never expected. I admire you, not just as a lawyer, but as a person, deeply. And that admiration, that connection, it evolved into something else, something much stronger. I continued, the words tumbling out, raw and honest. I know it's unexpected, and I know it probably complicates everything, but I couldn't keep it inside. Working with you, seeing your dedication, how you fight for what you believe in, it unearthed a part of me I didn't even know existed. You changed my perspective, Lydia. You showed me a different way to see the world, beyond my carefully constructed logic. Lydia listened, her expression closed, guarded, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the condensation of her glass. Her jaw was set, and for a moment, I feared I had alienated her completely, ruined any chance of salvaging anything. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, almost a whisper, laced with a vulnerability that surprised me. Mia, she began, her eyes finally meeting mine. I was surprised. More than surprised. I haven't been in this kind of situation before. It's a lot. She paused, searching for words. I value our working relationship, our partnership. What we built on this case was extraordinary. And to risk everything by stepping into something so unknown, it's terrifying. Terrifying how? I asked, gently, trying to coax her to reveal more. She looked away, her gaze unfocused, as if seeing something in the middle distance. Just terrifying. I've always kept things compartmentalized. My work, my personal life, my emotions. It's how I operate, how I stay focused. And this feels like it would break down all those walls. And I'm not sure I'm ready for that. She sighed, a deep, weary sound. I didn't run away, because I don't feel anything. I ran because I felt too much. It scared me. The thought of feeling something that deep, that real, that uncontrollable. I don't know if I can trust it. I don't know if I can trust myself with it. It wasn't an outright rejection, but it wasn't an acceptance either. It was a confession of her own struggle, her own fear of vulnerability, a side of her I had rarely, if ever, seen. She was battling an internal conflict, just as I had been battling mine. I need time, Mia, she said, her voice barely audible over the coffee shop's din to process this. To understand what this means. For us. For everything. She looked at me, a glimmer of hope mixed with a profound uncertainty in her eyes. Can you give me that? I nodded slowly, the glimmer of hope, a fragile, precious thing in my chest. I can. I will. Lydia rose from the table, her movements still a little stiff, a little guarded. Thank you for being honest, she said, her voice soft. And then, she turned and walked away, leaving me to sit there, cradling a mixture of relief and a heavy burden of waiting. The raw honesty had been laid bare, a confession offered, but the outcome remained an open, terrifying question mark. The time, Lydia requested, stretched into a period of careful navigation. The awkwardness didn't vanish overnight, but it slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a delicate reestablishment of our professional rhythm. We were still co-counseling on follow-up motions for the quantum case, which necessitated our continued interaction. Our legal discussions resumed their sharp, intelligent form, but now a new layer of unspoken understanding lay beneath the surface, like a deep, quiet current. Lydia, true to her nature, didn't shy away from our interactions, but she approached them with a cautious deliberation. She still held a certain professional distance, yet there were subtle changes. Her eyes, when they met mine, lingered a fraction longer. Her responses to my suggestions were thoughtful, often prefaced by a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She was slowly, cautiously, beginning to let me back in, to reveal the deeper layers beneath her fierce exterior. I learned to read her subtle cues, a softening around her eyes when she found something genuinely amusing, a brief, almost shy smile she reserved for moments of shared triumph. I understood that her initial flight wasn't about rejection of me, but a visceral reaction to the vulnerability that feelings, especially these feelings, demanded. She was grappling with a lifetime of compartmentalization, of protecting herself, and I knew that breaking down those walls wouldn't be a swift, dramatic event, but a gradual, gentle process. Our conversations outside of work resumed, tentatively at first, then with increasing ease. We started with neutral topics, current events, books, the surprisingly complex politics of the firm. But then, slowly, she began to open up about her past, not in grand narratives, but in quiet revelations. She spoke of the struggles her family faced, the grit it took to get where she was, the burning need to succeed, not just for herself, but to honor the sacrifices made for her. I listened, absorbing every detail, understanding more deeply the wellspring of her formidable drive, the resilience that made her so captivating. "I built these walls for a reason, Mia," she confessed one evening, as we lingered over coffee after a late strategy session, the city lights painting long streaks across the street. "To protect myself, to stay focused. It felt safer. But you just kind of quietly started to dismantle them, brick by brick, without even trying." A faint, rueful smile touched her lips, and I realized maybe I don't need them all anymore. My own walls, long reinforced by a preference for order and emotional distance, had already begun to crumble under Lydia's influence. Her vibrant energy had injected a dynamism into my life I hadn't known I was missing. Her willingness to challenge and question had pushed me beyond my own meticulous confines, showing me the power of passion alongside precision. Our connection deepened, evolving from tentative friendship into a nascent romantic relationship built on profound understanding and respect. There were no grand declarations, no sudden, dramatic shifts. Instead, it was a mosaic of quiet gestures, of thoughtful moments. A hand resting lightly on my arm as we walked down a hallway, a shared glance across a crowded room that held a universe of meaning, a comfortable silence that spoke volumes. Our affection was expressed through thoughtful gestures, Lydia remembering a small detail I'd mentioned weeks ago and bringing it up in conversation, or me leaving a new book on her desk that I knew she'd enjoy. One particularly cold evening, as we were leaving the office late, Lydia hesitated at the entrance. "Mia," she said, her voice soft, "it's freezing. Let me drop you off." It was a simple offer, a small act of kindness, but in the context of our evolving relationship, it felt like a gentle embrace, a silent promise. And as she drove, the silence in the car was no longer awkward, but a shared, easy comfort, filled with the warmth of unspoken affection. When she pulled up to my apartment building, she turned off the engine, and we sat for a moment, simply existing in each other's quiet presence. There was no need for words, only the profound sense of belonging. As we sat there, the glow of the streetlights filtering through the car windows, I turned to look at Lydia. In that quiet moment, all the walls we'd both built seemed to fade away. I leaned in, and this time, she didn't pull back. Our lips met in a soft, lingering kiss, a quiet confirmation of the connection we'd nurtured through months of challenge and understanding. It was a kiss that held the promise of a future we were both now willing to embrace, free from the fear that had once held us back. I looked at her, truly seeing her, the journey we had embarked on together, the unexpected turns and challenges. I saw the strength, the vulnerability, the passion, and the quiet tenderness that defined Lydia Thorne. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was where I was meant to be. I reflected on the unexpected trajectory of my life. I had sought a career built on logic and order, only to find love in the most illogical, beautifully chaotic form. This challenging case, this formidable colleague, had brought me an unforeseen love, a connection that had gently, profoundly healed parts of me I hadn't realized were broken. I understood that love, in its truest form, was not about grand gestures, but about the patience to understand, the courage to be vulnerable, and the tender process of mutual acceptance. Lydia and I were still navigating the nuances of our relationship, learning to integrate our different worlds, our different approaches to life. We were two complex equations, slowly, carefully, learning how to balance each other. There was no definitive ending, no neat bow tied on our story. Instead, there was an open horizon, stretching out before us, filled with the quiet, powerful promise of a future forged in conflict and blossoming in understanding, a love that continued to unfold, one thoughtful gesture, one shared glance, one comfortable silence at a time.